Welcome to the Knowledge for Men show. Your life will never be the same.
Your level of success will seldom exceed your level of personal development.
I want to die empty of regret. I want to die empty of my best work. We don't understand who we are. Instead, we're living out somebody else's narrative.
What one man can do, another man can do. If it's been done, it can be done again.
Being yourself and being your truest, most authentic self in every moment. If it scares you or makes you a little afraid, do it. Follow your heart and your gut.
The first stage, I think, is finding you, like finding out who I am today.
Stuff will not work. You will have things that fail. Success is when you're a happy, fulfilled person. How do you define success?
It's your life, and you are the creator of the movie script that is your life story.
Attention, if you are a frustrated man who feels like he is not getting the results he wants in his life, health, wealth, relationships, and personal growth, then I've got a powerful free video training for you to help you become a strong, grounded man so you can unlock unlimited power in your life, business, and relationships. Go to kfmconfidence.com to get instant access to this training. Again, that's kfmconfidence.com. If you want a Cliff Notes version of the best material that I've learned after 300 interviews on this podcast about being a stronger, more powerful man, then it's all here at kfmconfidence.com. All right, guys, welcome to the show. I'm here with Erik Newton. He's a former attorney. He once ran the largest family law practice in Northern California in the Bay Area. And so I thought I'd bring him on because he offers a unique perspective on relationships since he's seen and he's been working with couples, hundreds of couples through a divorce, through a serious breakup. So Erik, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Andrew. It's great to be here.
Man, Erik, you're sounding good.
Thanks, man. Thanks, man.
Aren't you guys happy, listeners? He's like, yeah, this guy sounds amazing. He's not speaking with his microphone in the car on his way to work. He's got a studio like me.
Yeah, I gave up the iPhone speaker set a long time ago.
Oh, yeah. It's interesting, too. I wonder when a guy has a mic like yours, or even the audience might be listening to my voice, it's like when they speak to me in real life, they're like, oh, that's how you sounded. It's like the mic makes you sound more, you're speaking from the heavens, so to speak.
You know what's fun about mics for me is learning the skill set around how to use them. You know, if you get really close,
oh yeah,
it just drops that volume.
It sounds like an R&B hit right there you're about to drop. But okay, Let's dive in with the show. Some podcast geeking out right there. But let's dive in with a favorite success quote or a saying that's helped you on your journey and why. Explain to us.
Yeah, I love this question. Okay, so I was thinking about it and I realized that most of my life I lived by one quote, which is, if you don't ask, it's an automatic no. And that got me, frankly, I think that created a lot of success for me. It gave me courage to step out of my comfort zone and to interact with people that I otherwise wouldn't. And a lot of good things in my life came from that. On the other hand, it definitely has limits. And so as I've been transitioning into my 40s, I've been changing it. And what really speaks to me these days is the simple concept, and I've never heard anybody else say this exactly this way, but it's simply that each moment is the beginning. Each moment is the beginning of the game, of life, of our experience. Each individual moment is the beginning. And that's how I live right now.
Each moment is the beginning. So what would be an example of that? Like each moment, let's talk about when you woke up today.
Yeah, that's a good way to think of it. Well, when I woke up today, I learned, if I'm being really honest with you, I learned that a close friend is dying. And he's very close to my heart. He's somebody who was a father figure in college and who I've held very dear, and he's dying from an inoperable condition. And so I have the unique opportunity to be able to talk to him and connect with him and say goodbye and experience all the emotions that come up around that, which, as you can imagine, are many.
Yeah, and I appreciate the vulnerability and telling the truth. I think a lot of people would have just kind of brushed over that. And what are you feeling now? I mean, that conversation happened earlier today.
Yeah. At first I was a little bit numb. Mm-hmm. I think the thing that I generally do is I don't experience my emotions when they first manifest. It takes a while for me to get present to what I'm actually feeling. And then immense sadness and loss kicked in. And then following that was a feeling of guilt. And that's the fascinating one to me. Obviously, sadness is going to happen, right? And obviously a little bit of numbness, because it's scary to be really in touch with our emotions, to get a little bit of woo-woo on you. But the guilt, what is the guilt, I thought to myself. And I realized it's all attached to these stories I have about my behavior in the past. I should have been a better friend to him. I should have gone and visited him.
Right.
I should have been there at his wedding. All these things, things that maybe I should have in some sense done or been around for, but they exist as stories. They exist as these ideas from the past, which is not here with us right now, that, however, can drive my experience of this moment and drive my actions in this moment. And if I'm living from that guilt, or if I'm living maybe just from the happiness of our past experiences, it's not a full experience. And it robs me of what's here right now. What's here right now in this second. It's kind of like starting a video game. Your character starts wherever your character starts. And it doesn't matter what happened in that character's past. What matters is what that avatar has in the moment to tackle the challenges before it.
And do you think that wherever we start, that we are prepared for the challenge ahead?
By definition, yes. And, the concept of the challenge ahead is a funny one too. I mean, who knows what that is?
Right.
We can kind of make up stories also about what's going to happen in the future and what our challenges should and shouldn't be or what they are. But, really, all that is this second, right now. I'm on this mic with you talking about this concept, and it's delicious. I enjoy this. I love this completely.
Talking about tapping into that present moment.
Which is where it's all at.
Which is where what is all at?
Our entire experience. Now, I don't want to I'm happy to talk about this. Tell me if we're getting too ethereal.
Oh, no. I know where we're going. I'm just leading the conversation, and I'm Perfect. All about the woo-woo. This podcast might as well be called the Woo-Woo Podcast. I think a lot of people would like that title too, actually.
The Woo-Woo Cast.
The Woo-Woo Cast.
I love it.
It just got, maybe we could be a duo. You could be me and you getting the woo-woo on.
Let's do the Woo-Woo Cast. I need another one.
All right. But coming back to the show now.
Experience.
Coming back to this experience here with Erik, I'm wondering if this has anything to do with the relationships, with divorce and the breakups, this whole not being present, not enjoying this experience.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. It definitely does. And by way of answering the question that you're asking, let me say one more thing about this notion of experience and how I hold it.
Yeah.
The understanding that I've come to in the last couple of years is that what actually exists, is my experience of what exists. And there may be something out there objectively, but as far as I'm concerned, the only thing that's here is my experience. And that's the same for each of us, and this is why it seems to us that the world revolves around us. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. But in essence, all that any of us individually has is this concept of our experience. And everything that we touch and feel and perceive and think and love and hate all exists within this rubric of experience, our awareness of that experience. And that's the place from which, when I'm at my most peaceful and most wise, my life is operating. And now, answering your question, what I discovered about divorce is that by and large, the reasons that people give for divorce are not really what's causing the split. The reasons that people give for divorce are legitimate and they need to be addressed, and people need to work on their interaction with one another because that's what a marriage is. That said, it's the experience in the moment that people are rebelling against. And that experience derives from our understanding of the past. And I think it's a flawed understanding.
What's an example of that?
Well,
that you've seen time and time again in this all the divorces. How many divorces have you been around?
So now my firm and I handled over 1,000.
Okay.
And
so I was wrong. I said 100. I said a couple hundred. Yeah.
Well, I didn't personally handle every single one of those.
Okay.
I mean, I touched almost all of them, interacted with them in one way or another, but didn't follow them all through to completion. So yeah, it's been a lot.
Okay.
And ultimately, what I see happening is that people are scapegoating their partner for their unresolved trauma from the past.
So let's throw some common examples on the table here, because I'm sure a lot of us are like, "Oh, I'm doing that right now."
Yeah, definitely. So anger.
All right.
Most of us experience the challenge in our relationship through a fight or anger, right? And and for me, the question is, what is that anger really? I mean, yes, you probably do need to do the dishes more. And yes, your partner does need to speak to you with more respect. And maybe you do need to have more sex in your relationship. But really, what is the fight coming from? What is that passion that has you say things you regret with such a, with an elevated tone, with so much fervor? What is that coming from? It's coming from an abstraction of fear. And that fear is rooted to something in the past, some story that you have about what happened in the past, and it created some sort of danger, and you've got to protect against that danger, and your last possible response is anger. And so out comes this fight. And it's true that you do need to address issues in the moment. You absolutely do. If your partner is crossing a boundary, doing something that doesn't work for you, yes, address it. You've got to. But also be present to your experience of it and what it's rooted in. It's rooted in a story about the past, and that story about the past is probably flawed. And it is just a story.
So
is that still too abstract?
No, it's not abstract. I just want to dive deeper and put all the parts out on the table here. What would a common example, a common story of the past be for the man that he is now like playing out and it's causing problems in the relationship?
Well, my friend, let's flip it on you, if you don't mind. Have you had a fight recently?
Sure.
With a partner?
Yes.
What was the topic?
Well,
are you allowed to say?
Sure. Truth. Like speaking the truth. Like not lying, perhaps.
And was it you doing the lying, or were you perceiving she was doing the lying?
I was perceiving that she was doing the lying.
And can you say what she was lying about?
What she was doing on the weekends.
And so you got upset with her that she was lying to you about what she was doing on the weekends. And why did it matter?
Because she said she was going to stop.
This sounds edgy.
It is edgy. Yeah. I mean, the relationship just ended like 10 days ago. So she said she was going to stop partying, drinking, and doing drugs. And she said that she was going to stop, and she did not stop.
And so you said that the relationship had to end. Okay. So that's one thing. I'm curious if you said the relationship had to end and it was painful and angry and you guys were fighting and it's left that way.
In a way, there's likely a lot of conversation and words left unsaid. And currently, in this moment, she is constantly still reaching out, like through every medium possible, like through the phone or through social media, like privately through social media. And I am choosing to ignore.
Mm-hmm.
After having already kind of shared my expression, my feelings, and many times.
Well, so this is a conversation about two things, and we kind of have to talk about it on both levels. There's the boundary, which is arbitrary but clear, right? You've decided that for your life, you can't have a relationship with somebody who's partying in that way.
Or, yeah. That is important, but also the truth. Just if you're going to say you're going to do something and you lie, and then it happens many, many times, then I just lose trust. And it's not even so much about the relationship. It's like, even as a friend, like I can't even trust you as a friend at this point, not even as an intimate partner. Right.
And yeah, and I love it. So you've got a boundary around not just the partying, but around truth. Right? Of course, how can you trust her if you don't know she's going to rely on her word?
Correct.
Yeah, and integrity. And that's right. That's legit. You've got to hold a boundary. If you don't hold a boundary in your relationship, you're either codependent or you're abusive, one or the other. And neither of those works in this real world of time and space.
Right.
And then on the other level is your experience, your emotional experience of what's happening.
Sure. Yeah, we can go into that.
Yeah. And we might not need to go that deeply into it, because what's fascinating to me, or what I'm interested in on it, is the reason that specific thing matters to you. It's rooted in this idea that you have of how the world works, which is that you've got to be able to trust your partner, and if you don't, there's possible danger there.
Right. Yeah, it's a core value. I mean, I have my values written out, and integrity being an important value that it's not even it's obviously it has to be there in an intimate relationship, but it's just with everything, with friends, with business partners, just everything. A man of integrity is, and by man, I just mean, a person of integrity is someone that is something that is important to me in my life.
Right. And I can imagine that when it first happened, you tried to express to her your value and why it was important and the boundary that she couldn't cross anymore. And maybe the first time when you told her, it was kind of a calm, rational conversation. And then the second time you told her, it was a little bit less calm, and it probably escalated over time, right? Until there was an actual fight.
Right.
And ultimately you said, look, this is the end because we're not going to match up in this way.
Right.
But there's two ways to go about that, right? There's, hey, this is going to end because it's a value and it crosses a boundary, and that's the end of it. And there's another way that it can end, which is an explosion and tears and anger and frustration and leftover emotion that's unresolved on both sides. And the emotional root of that explosion is what I'm talking about with regards to the unresolved past.
So what would be an example of that? Where would you're suggesting that possibly something from my past is making this topic more important?
Well, for sure, by definition, and look, it sounds like you handled it really healthfully, right? I mean, it sounds like you just said what you needed to say, and now you've created a clear boundary line, and that's great. I mean, that's textbook. That's the way you're supposed to do this. It's one of the top 5 relationship skills that I talk about in my work and in my writings. And since you handled it so healthily, it's a harder example to use of the emotional content from the past, but it's still there. If you had been really upset about it, you can see that it would be rooted in some kind of a fear, right? I mean, if you had been really angry, it would be rooted in some kind of concern about if you don't get angry, then something really bad is going to happen.
Right.
And it's that's what I'm talking about. That explosion of anger that happens, that gets unresolved. That's what I'm talking about as a key or a flag or a clue to what's going on for us emotionally. And it's rooted in this fear that probably manifested from something in the past, some trauma in our childhood, some unresolved pain that occurred when we were younger that we carry forward now. And now anytime something similar to that manifests, we get very upset and react perhaps with more energy than we need to.
I could absolutely see that. In a lot of cases, I'm trying to think where that plays in with me, and I'll have to wrestle with that more. But
well, the interesting thing is the more personal development work you do, the less of these explosions you have.
Right.
But each explosion is a clue. Each emotional reaction that you're not proud of is a clue to something that you can go work on, some issue from the past that you can go develop. And, I don't know if our example here got muddy, but the overarching concept is that usually when divorces are happening in relationships that are otherwise healthy, it's because one or both parties have these deep core wounds from the past that are manifesting in the moment as strong emotional reactions, too strong, really. And couples have an opportunity to use those to go deeper with one another, to resolve those wounds, to heal, to grow, or they can split. And not every split is based on that, but most of them are, frankly. And in your case, I don't know your partner's history, but I would guess that if she's having a strong emotional reaction, if she was unable to hold the boundary line that you requested that's otherwise healthy, she's got some core wounds from the past to deal with. And there's and there would be an opportunity, if you wanted to, for the two of you to explore those together. No shame in not doing it. But the fact that you're not together is probably rooted in that core wound from the past.
Yeah, I could see that. And I think in my case, I would be, from what she has told me, the first guy who was willing to walk away and not put up with that type of behavior.
Beautiful.
And that's something that's new for her. And I think that's why she is, constantly trying to reach out. And I think she's trying to recover or heal from this, but it's been too many encounters. It wasn't just one. It's been too many to count on one hand. And it's like, it's not for me at this point.
Yeah. And again, no shame in making that decision. In fact, kudos to you for making that decision, because if everything is as you've just described it, and of course, none of us really know the whole story, but if it is as you've just described it, then you're probably doing her a great service in setting a boundary, because then she can see the impact that she has on the rest of the world with the behavior and how that's going to impact her. And she can probably learn and grow from that.
Yeah. And by any means am I trying, like I haven't mentioned her name or anything, but I mean, her friends probably listen to this. And so by any means am I putting her down or saying she's a bad person? It's just what's happened. I just kind of put it on the table of the experience. And so I'm not mad at her. I'm not angry at her. It's just, I've got to move on.
Yeah. And blessings to her and blessings to you for doing it. And sometimes sometimes these transitions are inevitable. That, by the way, is one of the other lessons that I learned seeing so many breakups. I don't have this perspective that every relationship should stay together.
Okay.
And that if it doesn't stay together, something's wrong. I think a lot of people assume that that's what my work is about these days, because I've transitioned from being a divorce lawyer to being a relationship podcaster who writes about healthy relationships.
Right.
What I actually believe is that that we come together to learn something, to grow in some way. And that sometimes that process is complete and it's time to healthfully, peacefully move on.
Yeah, relationships serve a purpose in time.
Exactly.
And that time can be very short. It could even be a couple weeks or months, but it could last years and it could last a lifetime.
Or a lifetime, right?
And but yeah, I agree. I don't think all relationships are meant to last for eternity, but I do think they all serve a purpose.
Right. And because they all serve a purpose, and because we're all deeply flawed, terrified human beings, there's an opportunity for us to have compassion for one another in the process. And if anything drove me out of divorce, it was the lack of compassion in the divorce universe for all the parties involved. And what I see in what you're doing with your partner is, while you've drawn a strong boundary there, and it sounds healthy for both of you, frankly, you're doing it with a lot of compassion and understanding for her. And I just want to point that out so that we can use it as a model of behavior, because it's really lovely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, really, really good. You're on my show asking me the questions, but turning it around. I think that was very educational for the listeners. So I understand the value in what happened with me is probably similar to what's going on with a lot of other people, and that there could be a lot of lessons and gifts in those questions. So I was, open to that experience. And now looking at these reasons for relationships to end, and you've pointed out a few really interesting examples here of like the pain of the past is being played out in the present, and in that situation, that fight, there's an opportunity to go deeper with one another and or not.
Right.
And that not is typically a breakup.
Yeah, that not is a breakup or a transition. Infidelity is an example that comes to mind in the concept of transition.
Right.
A lot of people say infidelity is their number one deal breaker. If you cheat on me, it is over.
What do you think?
Well, for me personally, it would certainly be a deep betrayal of trust. If my partner were to cheat on me, I would feel horrendously slighted. And of course, there would be a huge reaction. I mean, we would have to have a long conversation and do a lot of work to recover from it. That said, it's not necessarily a deal breaker for me. And it's not about the sex, it's about the breaking of an agreement. For her, on the other hand, it is the deal breaker. If I were to cheat on her, it would be over. She wouldn't care if we recovered. Sure, we could be friends again, maybe sometime down the road, but there would be no chance of a romantic partnership after that. And I've seen a lot of couples come into my divorce office who've been through that, and they divorced as a result. And I've seen now 4 or 5 couples on my podcast come in and tell me that they've been through an infidelity and that they've recovered. And, my podcast is sort of like yours. I never know what's going to come out, and we don't have topics in advance. We just start talking. And so people start sharing with me that they're polyamorous, or that they're, in some sort of crazy relationship structure, or they've been through an infidelity and recovered. And it's always fascinating. But what I've seen in the infidelity recovery space, if a couple is willing to recover from an infidelity, they typically have to transform who they are as partners for one another and what the relationship means in order to move on. If they don't do that, then they're really just ignoring it, and they're sort of having a relationship on top of this icky thing from the past that kind of betrays trust, and neither one of them is really comfortable ever. But if they really fully move on, it's because they've had to transform themselves. And that transformation is like a death because the last relationship is ended. It's done. It's complete.
Right.
And now there's this new one that they're going to create. Kind of like I was saying at the beginning, each moment is the beginning. And so they're like, well, this is the story from our past, and this is the stuff that happened, and this is who we are, and what are we going to do now? And they might choose to stay together and create a new kind of relationship. The couples who do that I've talked to have all said that their relationship is better than they imagined that it could be. But they had to go through the fire of destroying, killing, letting die the old relationship and then rebuilding a new one.
Yeah. The old relationship dies.
Yeah. And that transition is painful. I mean, that's not easy, but it's doable. And so I guess that's all to answer your question of, when something's not working, either the relationship ends or it transforms.
Yeah. Do you see any theme amongst, because you've served, your firm had served thousands of couples now where they're getting a divorce and then they break up and then they both get into other relationships? Are they more likely to get into another divorce? Don't statistics show that?
They do. Yeah. It's a great question because the statistics show what you're saying, that second marriages are more likely to fail than first marriages. However, my anecdotal evidence, and evidence from a lot of other people in the relationship industry that I talk to suggests that if a person who's been through a divorce does all the work that they need to do to complete that process and learn what they needed to learn from it, that second marriages are far more successful. Mm. There's a way that we all go into our relationships living in a fantasy. The stereotypical fantasy that we ascribe to, I think, young women, and this isn't necessarily only women, but is the sort of fairy tale princess fantasy where I'm going to meet Mr. Right and everything's going to be perfect and he's going to take me away on the white horse and we're going to live this fantasy future. And young men, certainly me, have a different kind of fantasy often, which is more like I'm going to have the perfect woman who's going to prove to my friends that I'm awesome and that I'm powerful and that I'm an empire builder, right. And maybe I'm going to prove that I have the best sex life that there ever was, which means I'm a great guy. And neither of those things is realistic. And sometimes it takes having a marriage to realize, oh, wait a minute. Yeah. Wow. This is just human life and we're flawed and it's hard.
Right.
And then a divorce and then the recovery from it to go into another marriage with eyes wide open. And I've seen a lot more of that, I have to say. Maybe it's the demographic of people that I interact with, but there's a lot of learning available in a breakup.
Absolutely. I think it's one of the most painful experiences as humans to be in love with someone and then for that relationship to end, and especially if it ends tragically where someone is cheating or where there's this crazy fight. I think there's so much lesson and growth for the man after a breakup, and that growth isn't just immediately the weeks or months following. I mean, the growth can continue to happen, and as you reflect back on what happened, even years after, you continue to grow. I think it's any man that's been through a very tough breakup or divorce that was very serious, and they have a smile on their face and they're moving through life confidently. I always say to myself, like, that's a guy you should talk to. Like that guy's learned a lot.
Yeah. And specifically with men, for whatever reason, we don't seem to be coded in this particular culture to explore and talk about our emotional lives.
Absolutely,
the way women are.
The whole man box, which kind of says, hey, as a man, you'll be okay. Just tough up and keep moving forward and you'll be all right. Time will heal it. You'll be good. Yeah. And we can't show emotion. We can't show any sign of weakness. And we might even lie to people closest to us, like friends and family, because we want to show that we're strong, even though inside we're secretly crying.
Right. And, there is wisdom. There is some wisdom in that phrase, man up, because there is a way in which it's healthy to compartmentalize so that we can get on with our lives. But doing that to the extent that we never address or that we completely bury our pain and our core wounds, as I've been mentioning throughout the show, means that we're only living half our lives. I mean, we are emotional creatures. We're physical, we're intellectual, spiritual, certainly, and emotional creatures. And cutting that off at the knees just, it handicaps us.
Yeah. Yeah,
So-
absolutely. So what do you think is the best conversation that you think current couples, existing relationships should be having more?
That's a great one. There's the surface level conversations which are critical, and I hear over and over that couples are not having: money, sex, and kids. Those are the three topic areas that people seem to be the most scared of. And we all have this idea that, this is just going to work out. Of course he wants kids, or, of course she wants to have a good sex life, or, and we seem to be okay around money. But those three specific topic areas are, I think that they're aligned, or they're anchored to our deepest unresolved stuff. Money, it's a proxy for value. And at the core, we humans are scared that we don't have value. We're looking around at the world, and we're worried on some level that people don't love us and that we don't have value. And money is the perfect proxy for that. And it causes so many fights. I mean, in the divorce office, one of these three issues, and almost always money, was going to be implicated in what caused the divorce.
Like not having enough money, or what do you mean by money being the issue?
Well, not having enough money is a thing. I mean, certainly the less money you have, the more tension is present in your life, just because you have to deal with more challenges. Right. You can't buy your way out of challenges. But it's not really about quantity. It's about values around money. Every human has a different set of values around money, and different lessons that we've learned from our parents about how we are supposed to interact with money. But really it comes down to, you could say it comes down to risk tolerance and sort of savings and spending habits. Everybody's going to be somewhere different on the spectrum of how much risk can we take with an entrepreneurial endeavor or a purchase. And everyone's going to be somewhere different on the spectrum of how much should we save versus how much should we spend, and should we buy luxury goods, or should we buy generic goods, or should we go on vacations, or should we invest in the 401k? And all of these questions sort of come together in this unarticulated emotional spaghetti mix up. And, then people start trying to eat the spaghetti together and find out that they're stuck in a knot of spaghetti. This is a funny analogy I've never used before. But, you get stuck in these knots, and those knots are where conflict arises. And it's not just normal conflict about should we go to the movies. It's this deep stuff, because it's all attached to value and purpose and meaning. Money just goes right to the core of the messy stuff. Did that answer your question? I'm not sure if I got off track with you there.
You may have gotten a little off track.
Sorry about that.
I'm trying to figure out how I could make it work, and I was like, you know what, I can't think of anything, so I'll just put that out there.
That makes sense, dude.
But I did enjoy what you shared. So money's a big.
Well, I think you were saying, what are the examples of why money and sex and kids cause so many fights? And I was bringing these up to suggest that these are the topics people need to talk about more.
Money, sex, and kids. All right. So what would be the questions they should be having around money, sex, and kids?
Well, the questions are sort of too numerous to spin out quickly. But what I suggest to people around money and sex and kids is to engage an expert, a neutral expert in one of these areas. And it doesn't have to be a therapist or a financial planner. It can be as simple as, going and downloading a set of questions from the internet. There are hundreds of websites
just
on this stuff.
Questions about money I should be having with my partner. Questions about sex I should be having with my partner. Questions about kids. Are you suggesting there are different expectations? Maybe let's say the woman would like to have 5 kids, whereas I'm just throwing this out there, not saying all women want to have this big family, but just a scenario where what the one party wants to have many kids, or the other party is more, I just want to have 1 or 2. Yeah. Are you saying that's the issue there? Or?
Well, the threshold question is, do you want kids? That's always the first question. That one's pretty easy to answer,
right?
For most people. Sometimes they'll hide the answer, but then it gets into, and often this one is hard to deal with in advance, because it starts to manifest when you actually have kids. But what comes next is, how do you raise them? What are your values around raising kids?
Yeah.
And
I can see that, yeah.
And the reason it's a challenge is because when you've got this little life you've got to take care of, suddenly it's a life and death scenario. And if your partner is not on board with some decision that you think is critical, man, it gets serious fast.
Yeah.
And you can't really discuss all of those in advance. You should try to do some work. If you're going to have a kid, read a book on child raising and make sure you guys are basically on the same page. But what's more important is that you've started those conversations so that when you do have a baby and there is a critical issue and there is tension around it, you're not surprised and you know how to deal with it.
Yeah. I know I'm going to have some sort of issue around the raising of the kids. I mean, I've interviewed hundreds of guys. I read hundreds of books, and I can already foresee that I want to raise my kid in a way where he's not going to be extremely privileged. I know that I anticipate that my financial will be quite well, and I feel that maybe the partner won't be exactly on board with that, but I would want to give them enough.
Yeah.
But I think on the other part, they might be like, no, I love him. Let's like give him whatever he wants. And I know it's a discussion that I think I haven't really thought about, but as you're talking, I'm like, yeah, it's probably going to be an issue.
Yeah. And having that discussion is key. So definitely articulate that advance and see if you can find the middle ground. But what will inevitably, definitely, without question happen is the kid will be born and you guys will have disagreements. You just will.
Right.
And some of them are going to feel critical. And I guess the point I would leave you with on that is critical differences, unresolvable differences, do not necessarily mean the end of the relationship.
Okay.
You can find workarounds for everything.
Yeah.
So when it comes up, and because I say that because that's the fallacy. That's this. We all have this idea that, well, we're a good match for each other, so we're going to find a resolution to everything, and you're not. You won't. Every couple has unresolvable problems, and a lot of times they're around money, sex, and kids.
With sex, is it frequency and kind of style of sex? Like some might want more casual, some might have some more fetish type things, or frequency, like, hey, we're only having sex once a week. Like, I really like to every other day, every day, multiple times a day. Are those the kind of questions around sex, like just getting clear on what are expectations?
Yep. Those are the threshold questions there for sure.
Protection as well.
Well, right. Protection. The thing with sex, so the research says that frequency is one of the hardest issues to ever change. So your taste and frequency is probably going to stay roughly the same for most of your adult life. So if that's a big issue and it's critical for you, notice it early. But again, it's not unresolvable. The fact is we're all different with regards to our sexual tastes. We just are. You're never going to find a perfect matchup. They don't exist. So it's not so much, are you going to find a perfect matchup, as are you going to find one where your differences are valuable to each other, or where your differences are workable, or if you're really lucky, where your differences create a lot of fun sparks. And there's a core concept to that, which I'm happy to talk about, that I think is really important. But really, it's sort of the same thing as with the kids, knowing you're not going to be a perfect matchup, talking about as much as you can in advance. And then when the challenges arise, dealing with them head on, because that's where you create intimacy, is by dealing with challenges head on.
What would you say is so for someone listening who's like, damn, I have a challenge I need to work with on my couple when I get home today, and what would you say is a good way to just start that conversation, to go into that? It's like, how do I actually get in there? Like, how do you start the conversation? That's all.
Step one is to notice that you probably have shame around your desires. Most of us do. For whatever reason, culturally, we're coded to be shamed for what we want sexually. And yet, there's nothing wrong with what you want. As long as you're not hurting somebody or crossing some boundary that is unacceptable, as long as it's consensual, is another way to say that, there's no shame around what you want sexually. So when you have something that you want to discuss, well, I guess there's two ways to come at it. One is, if you have something you want to discuss, start by acknowledging to yourself there's no shame in it. It's just what you want. And if it's critical and you don't talk about it, it's going to leak out in ways you don't like. So it's better to face it head on and start the conversation that way. Say, look, there's this thing. I'm a little scared to tell you. I feel a little bit of shame around it, though I know intellectually that I shouldn't. And since we're so intimate, I want to share it with you. Can we have a discussion about this thing? That's how you approach that conversation. If you know that there's something to talk about, but you can't get your finger on it, and you don't know quite how to even start the exploration around what you want sexually and what you need as an erotic being, well, there's great books and websites for that too. There's a website called Mojo Upgrade where you can answer 100-question list, and it's like a survey. And then the website automatically sends the same list to your sexual partner. And then it emails you guys anything where you match up. So it might ask, do you want to have a threesome? And if you say no and she says no, there's no email between you. If you say yes and she says no, again, no email. But if you both say, yeah, I'd be interested in a threesome, bing, it sends you an email. And then you're like, oh, you're interested in a threesome? I was scared to ask you about, but how cool. Let's go figure it out. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I see what you're saying. I'm just wondering, how do you get her to take the test?
Well, I think you just ask her, my man.
Yeah, no, that was a joke. It's a joke. But I think that's great. You said Mojo Upgrade.
Yeah.
All right, great.
But there's about 50 of those. I don't even know if Mojo Upgrade's still operating. It's been about a year for me.
What would you call that? What would you call that kind of test? Like a relationship? Like
sexual compatibility survey is, I think, how they define it.
Compatibility survey.
Yeah,
I should send that out to every girl before I start even the first date. And be like, hey, by the way, before you just grab tea, you've got to fill this 100-question survey out.
Can you imagine? Dude, if you actually got a date after doing that, you would know she was amazing.
Oh, yeah. And then we'd be on the same page, and we can go straight into what matters. I'm just kidding. But this has been very impactful. I really like how this conversation has been going. I want to dive into the knowledge round. Just going to ask you a few more questions here.
Sure.
Kind of shorter answers in the knowledge round. So are you ready?
Yeah.
Have you ever felt like you weren't the strong, grounded man that you know you're capable of becoming? Like there's something more inside of you, but you don't know how to get it out. Me too. Years ago, I was broke, sleeping on my brother's couch, and just got out of a serious breakup that left me on the floor for months. Now, I have a multiple six-figure business. I'm in the best shape of my life, have an abundant dating life, and live on the beach here in San Diego. I want you to break through too and create the life that you want. And because people kept asking me so many questions, I've created this free video training series on becoming a strong, grounded man so that you can have more freedom, love, and connection in your life. I'll also teach you how to build real backbone to boost your masculinity as a man so that you can have more respect, power, and confidence personally and professionally. Simply go to kfmconfidence.com to get this training. Again, that's kfmconfidence.com. Also, I share the #1 conversation that your father never had with you about women. That will be a major wake-up call for 90% of you and will improve the quality of your relationships forever. Go to kfmconfidence.com to get this free training today. Welcome to the Knowledge Round, where the guests will be asked rapid-fire questions to give the audience invaluable pieces of wisdom to help transform their lives. Starting in 3, 2, 1, showtime. And the first question I have for you is, what advice would you give to a man who's feeling really lost and unsure of his purpose?
That's great. All right. I got to tell you, Andrew, I don't really believe in the idea of purpose. I know that probably runs counter to what you have on your podcast. I think purpose is a story that we make up in the moment. And when I'm at my most powerful and peaceful is when I'm allowing the world and I'm allowing myself to be just exactly as I am in the moment. That's when everything that's really worked for me in my life manifests. When I start getting stuck in the question of what's my true self and what's my purpose, I go down this whole rabbit hole of these stories from the past and all this strategy and all these fears, and none of them quite get to that happiness and peaceful presence that is where I find my greatest creativity. So I say let go of the question of purpose and be in the moment.
Yeah, maybe that's your purpose.
Nice reframe, brother. I like it. Maybe that's my purpose.
No, that's good. I'm not here to be like, no, that's not true. There are many people who have said whatever works for anyone. That's the one thing that has just really helped me as I've just grown so much. I've learned a lot, and I used to try and impose on anyone else who doesn't agree with my way of living. And I just think, hey man, that works for you. Amazing. And what works for me works for me. What works for you works for you.
Amen.
Let's all just have some fun and enjoy this thing we call life. But next question,
Right.
what do you think is really holding most men back from becoming the strongest versions of themselves?
Fear. And we could stop it there if you want. But I think that most of our identity is based on fear. Most of the things that we say we want are strategies to avoid fears. And most of the things that we say we like are strategies to avoid fears. The most of our personality is based around avoiding and getting around and getting over a series of fears that we have, which probably, if you really look deep, are some kind of abstraction of the fear of death.
Yeah, absolutely. I think if you keep asking why to someone, why they're scared, I think the reason is because we somehow think this is going to kill us.
Yeah. And the solution to that, so that's just the quick answer, but the solution to it, if there is such a thing, is to go through the fear.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's to dive into and understand and deconstruct and live with and sit with and be with fear.
Yeah. Yeah. Fear to me points me in the direction that I need to go.
Amen.
And it doesn't mean I'm going to dive, but it does mean I'm going to take the first step and I'm going to start the path.
And diving can just be a simple matter of asking, what's the fear present right now? Like, what is it? Just define it. And then if you have a fear, you're like, I'm scared of public speaking. Then you can say, because public speaking would mean what? What's the fear below that? Well, people are going to be looking at me and maybe they're going to judge me. What's the fear below that? Oh, well, if people judge me, then they're not going to like me. I'm going to be an outcast. Oh, what's the fear below that? And you can just keep going as many layers as you can take yourself. That's not such a hard process, really. It's sort of a fun exercise. That's the way to dive into fear.
I like it. And what would you say have been 3 of your most influential books in, let's say, the topic of relationships or even dating, and why?
There's a book that's controversial called Your Brain on Love by Daniel Amen. Now, it's controversial because people don't love his research, but he's pointing to something critical, which is that a lot of our experience of love is based on the chemical structure of the brain, the neurotransmitters that are present in the brain at any moment. And just taking an objective, as far as that's possible, given our current research, an objective look at the stages that the brain goes through in love, first a bunch of dopamine and serotonin, then oxytocin, is so instructive about what's coming down the road. It helps us with the transitions to different phases of relationships. So I love that book, Your Brain on Love by Daniel Amen. There's another book, The History of Marriage by Stephanie Kuntz, who's an anthropologist somewhere in the Pacific Northwest. And she looks at all the different structures that marriage has taken throughout history. And there have been so many. I mean, even today in China, people are marrying ghosts. There are ghost marriages in China. You've got infant marriages in the Sudan and in parts of India. You've got marriages in Tibet today where one sister or one woman will marry all of the brothers in a particular family. And that's called traditional marriage in Tibet. Marriage takes so many structures, but we get locked into the idea that marriage has to be a particular way in this culture. And it's just not true. So reading that book always gives me a lot of insight into what's possible. And there's a book that let me say this. There's an author that I love named Esther Perel. She has a book called Mating in Captivity, where she does work around how do we keep sex passionate and alive in this funny culture where we lock ourselves into monogamous relationships. And she's doing some work on infidelity now, and she's about to release a book, which I think is yet to be titled, around how to recover from infidelity and transform in the way that we were talking earlier. And her work is fascinating.
Yeah, so I'm interested in that book about how marriage has been, how it's so different in different cultures, and how marriage is really it's a construct.
Yeah, it's a social construct.
It's a social construct.
It exists only for community.
Yeah, it is not like the way of human, so to speak, because it's different in other cultures. So that says it works for them over there, and they probably think what we're doing here in Western culture, or let's just say the United States, is weird.
Yeah. And you think most marriages in the world are still arranged marriages.
Right. Yeah,
love marriages are the minority.
I know. They don't have to listen or read my book on dating. They skip it. That's amazing. I'm just kidding. They just go straight. It's called The Dating Playbook for Men. And it's a top ranked book under the dating category. If under Audible, I mean, last I checked, if you type in the word dating, just the keyword under Audible, it's number 1.
Oh, wow. I've got to check it out. Man, I should have cited your book.
Yeah. Why come on. I'm missing out. Next question, more of a scenario here for you, Eric. Imagine you had 60 seconds with your 25-year-old self. If you could sit down and envision what Erik, 25-year-old Erik, is doing personally, professionally, financially, relationships, what would you tell him to do? What would you tell him not to do?
Gosh, what a great question. Well, I think the first thing I would tell him is it's okay to have your passions, but remember they're not as important as you think. And the second thing I think I would tell myself is you can't have a game without the rules. So don't be scared of the rules and the restrictions. Use them. Rather use them to your advantage. Play with them. Dance with them. I think that would have, if I'd have known those 2 lessons, it would have eased a lot of suffering. Oh, and a third. Can I say a third?
No, you can't.
We're done.
We're done. We're out of time, man.
That's it.
No. What's the third?
There's immense peace and transparency. Another word for freedom is nothing left to hide. The idea that we have to hide what's true for us in the moment, or our true selves, I guess, as you might put it, is itself a fantasy, and it only creates suffering because is what is. Yeah, I think that's what I tell myself.
Is that your philosophy for life?
That is.
No, man, I'm getting deep.
Is what it is. Allow. I think my core philosophy is to allow.
To allow.
Or surrender is another way to put it.
To surrender.
To surrender to what is.
And so immediately, I think for many men, they think, okay, sounds good, but it sounds weak.
Yeah.
But what would you say to that response?
Well, I think it sounds weak because we're scared. We think we have to put up walls. The greatest strength is, water is so much stronger than most other elements because it can flow and move around and adapt and adjust. And when it's frozen, it's brittle, right? Same thing with steel. When it's frozen and rigid, it's brittle. You can crack it. But flexible, or I would say iron, but steel is stronger than iron. It's flexible. It bends. It allows the shape to take its natural state. And for me, allowing isn't giving up. I can hear how it may sound like that, allowing the world to be as it is, or surrendering to the world as it is, could sound like giving up. It's not giving up for me because I still have agenda. I still have desires. My podcast, I put a lot of effort into making my podcast successful. I'm writing a book, all of these things. They're desires and agendas, and it's good to have them. But the world is what it is. And my experience is what it is. And resisting what's true only creates suffering.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Acknowledging what's true and then acting from there, that's where creativity lies. That's where effectiveness lies. But resisting it, beating ourselves up for it, wishing that it weren't so, trying so hard to be that it's not what it is, that's where pain comes from.
Mm.
So surrender to what it is. Just surrender. I am so sad right now. I am so deeply raw and sad about my friend passing.
Mm.
I just got to allow that. Just surrender to it. Be sad. Because from there comes all my memory that I love him so much and why, what he's meant to me, who he's been for me. That's the place from which I can celebrate him.
Yeah, you're living the human experience by accepting what is.
Yeah.
And that's with the friend right now.
Yeah.
Have you heard of that story about Alexander the Great, where he conquered this part of, I believe it was like deep in Afghanistan, and there was a guy, he was making everyone bow, like after he had conquered this town, and there was one type of monk figure who did not bow, and everyone had bowed, and so they immediately go to cut off his neck. And before they do, Alexander stops and says, no, wait. And he tries to talk to the guy, and he says, why won't you bow? You're going to die if you don't bow. And he basically refused to bow because he said he's already surrendered. He's already dead. And that Alexander was so shocked that no one, people try and fight him. People always obey if they're going to surrender. And there's this one guy that had already accepted his death. And he said, how can I kill a man who has already surrendered to life. It makes no sense. I like to kill a man who's swinging a sword at me. I can kill, but I can't kill someone who is already at peace with his death. Mm-hmm. And so he spared him.
It's beautiful. Never heard it.
Yeah. What I think it is in the book by Osho, who's like an Indian philosopher, but there's a chapter about surrender, and that just story kind of really stuck out to me. Surrendering
to death is surrendering to life. That's
Man,
where it all,
I just didn't. I did not think that this episode would go here, but it did. I'm like reading your intro. I'm like, all right, Erik Newton, former attorney in the Bay Area. All right, and then here we are. All right, Osho and accepting what is.
Yeah,
and it's
so
great,
right?
And it's great. It's absolutely great. It's been a fantastic episode. I mean, I've really enjoyed listening to the quality of your audio on your mic. Just kidding. No, your content is amazing. And for all the listeners, let's see your website address here. Together.guide. Is that right?
Yeah.
Together.guide. You got your magazine, you got your podcasts, you got your workshops, all the newsletter, all the information there. And do you have a book coming out? It sounds like Erik, you got a book in your body there.
Got a book in the body. Actually, I've got two. One is that I'm working on right now is the Divorce Lawyer's Guide to Marriage.
Okay.
And I've just written a 4-part series of articles on that if you want to get a sneak peek on some of those insights. And you can find those at the website, like you said, together.guide. And another one is a memoir about some crazy experiences that happened in Tibet. I put someone's life at risk, and I learned a lot about myself and my ego in the process.
Are you climbing?
No, we were hiking up a mountain, but the risk that I created had to do with the way the government works in Tibet. And
I see.
I was just being naive and being an American kid and overly optimistic about the world, and really, really put someone in harm's way.
I see. Yeah, excited for the books. Excited to see the latest work you got, and check out the work. So for everyone, check out together.guide.
That's right.
Follow up with Erik. And it's been a pleasure having you here on the show. Honestly, like I said, I had no idea where we're going to go, but I think we went somewhere really deep and provided a ton of value here for the audience.
That's the best way to do it, isn't it? Just let it flow.
Just let it flow, just like water.
Thanks a lot, Andrew. I really appreciate you having me on the show.
Thank you for listening to the Knowledge for Men podcast. Hundreds of interviews and millions of downloads later, we're continuing to build an international movement, and we're just getting started. So if you enjoyed this episode, go ahead and leave a helpful review in iTunes, because it really helps the podcast grow so we can impact even more men in the world who need this. Guys, this is all about living with purpose, where every day you only do things that matter to you. You wake up, live with purpose, and take massive action towards the life you want. And always remember, love the life you have while creating the life of your dreams. Go to kfmfree.com to get a surprise bonus I've made for my listeners. Again, that's kfmfree.com for something that's changed my life, and I'm offering it to you for free. Also, check out my Amazon best-selling books that I've written for you to help you crush life at kfmauthor.com. Again, that's kfmauthor.com to see all the books I've created to help you break through in life. This is your host, Andrew Farabee, founder of knowledgeformen.com, and I'll see you in the next episode.